Tonight I'm feeling mean, I'm feeling mean. Tonight I'm feeling mean, I'm feeling mean.
Don't trust Polly. Polly is a mean bird. There is a great Tom Chapin children's song called Don't Play with Bruno. Bruno is a dweeb. This song off his Moonbeat CD is one of my favorites. Kids' songs are often favorites with our parrots as well. In Don't Play with Bruno, Shirley and Sue refuse to play with Bruno because he's a dweeb. Local kids come up and see him digging a hole, but the two girls tell them not to play with Bruno because Bruno is a dweeb. The kids don't listen to Shirley and Sue. In the end, Bruno finds a bone, a tractor, and a lost city. The two girls come over and want to be his friend, even if he is a dweeb. My mentor, Susan Friedman, Ph.D., brought this concept up in my Living and Learning with Animals professional class. When we put labels on living creatures, then we force them into a mold of our own making. Calling Bruno a dweeb paints a picture in our mind. It is not a pretty picture and can turn us away from being a friend. And, should we say these things out loud, it can cause others to think twice about being a friend with him too. At its worst, these labels can force a child to go without friends, alone and without companionship. I was one of those kids, labeled fat boy. No one wanted to play with me. Don is a fat boy was an incantation that kept me from making many friends. I even heard one of my so-called friends talking to his mother just before I left his yard. And she was telling him, "I don't know why you play with him. You really shouldn't play with him." And he said, "Well, if I don't have anyone else to play with, I play with Don." Having seen the effects of this type of labeling in my own life, it breaks my heart to see it done to parrots that have no way to prove that they are not mean, evil birds or little Hannibal Lecters. When we get bit or a bird threatens us, we often rush to conclusions. We become judge, jury, and executioner. We tell others our opinion of a bird, and then many will follow along after us, like lemmings off the cliff. As word spreads, a bird becomes an outcast. In time, the parrot may even be euthanized because of the tales that have been told. Another such bird that I knew was Marley. I was told that he would not tolerate being around a man. Using the principles of applied behavior analysis, within a week, he was stepping up on my hand. Within another week, he was running around in the aviary while I was sitting in a chair and not paying attention. Chloe, for whom the Chloe Sanctuary was named, was labeled a starter bird. That's what they told me the day I got her. How many of you would have called her that? Those of you that knew her or knew of her. How many who knew her would say that she was little more than a stepping stone to bigger and better birds? That was their label for her, and so she was treated as little more than an ornament. Dr. Friedman would stand for none of this. She taught us to open our eyes and to observe carefully. She cautioned us to examine our own thoughts and find these gross exaggerations, these unhelpful labels, and jettison them from our thought process. Kind of like George Jetson was launched from his bed in the morning, if you remember the old cartoon. We were taught to observe, form tentative conclusions, and put them to the test in a process called the functional analysis. Some years ago, I observed a bird that had been labeled by many as mean and evil. A volunteer and I tried to towel him to get him to his visit at the vet. I noted these behaviors. At no time did Pepe, while out of his cage, do anything but run from us. He squawked loudly and turned away or ran from us. His body attempted to twist away as I toweled him and placed him in the cage. Once in the cage, he ran to the furthest point from me. What did this mean? If Pepe were conditioned to an aggressive response, what some might call mean or evil, he would attack and not run away. At no time outside the cage did he attempt to bite, and this too does not fit the term mean or evil. He was just trying to protect himself. A fear response. I argued that there is no reason to call a bird by any label, regardless of their behavior. Once in the cage, he calmed down. His feathers were close to his body. His eyes did not pin when I spoke to him, and he did not attempt to move away from me. His eyes gently fixed on mine. By this point, I knew that the label placed on him was far from the truth. I began to suspect the cause of this labeling: cage aggression. If a bird seeks to separate itself from its environment or the people in it, it will often protect itself in the cage. This is called cage territoriality. In my experience, and in many scholarly works, we see that birds may show fear aggression or territorial aggression. The only other kind of aggression has to do with sickness. If a bird is sick, it may threaten you and try to keep you away. We don't know if this is due to an attempt to protect the flock from disease, something that's built into them, or if the bird is protecting itself because it is in a weakened state. 5 minutes later, I released him into the examination room by opening the cage door. He came out shortly thereafter and sat on the cage. Pepe's breathing was regular, his eyes did not pin, his feathers were smooth against his body. All these indicated that he was calm. He landed on the floor and walked around a bit. His gait was slow and deliberate, and the other signs were just as I had mentioned. It was clear to me that Pepe was not what he was made out to be, excessively aggressive. When the doctor worked to towel him, he ran again. He ran and did not turn back to bite. Eventually, he ran up onto my arm and then onto my shoulder. He sat on the back of my neck for a while. He never even threatened to bite me, even though I was a complete stranger to him. Later that day at the volunteers' home, he stepped up onto a stick for me. A few moments later, his eyes stopped pinning, so I put up my arm and he stepped up. What followed was the absolute picture of a mean, evil bird. He snuggled close to my chest for a while. Then he reached up and gently chewed the button off my shirt, occasionally looking up at me. I held him for about 10 minutes and then took him to his cage, where he casually entered inside. Cage aggression had been the problem. It was probably fear-based. Often a bird will protect its home from any and all comers. This is generally not a problem. Even if the bird tries to bite when you change the food bowls as you open the side doors, there's a simple solution. Don't change the food and water until the bird comes out to play. Use it as an excuse to take out the bird at least twice a day. Use a stick to carry the bird to the top of the cage. You might wait a minute or two and ask the bird to step up. The story of his evil nature became branded on Pepe. No one wanted to send him to hell. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, or so they say. The label hung around his neck could have been a death warrant, though. This, I am sure, is the fate of far too many birds. We must remember that labels have no place in our work where behavior is concerned. To say that Pepe is sweet, loving, and adorable is just another set of labels. Suppose that you apply these labels and suddenly he bites. What do you do now? Change them for another set of labels? It is better to say that Pepe steps up, cuddles close to your body, plays with buttons, chatters like a lady from the Bronx. Yeah, he did that. All of these things were true. So, sticking to the facts of observation keeps us from turning our friends, neighbors, and parrots into two-dimensional cartoon characters in our minds. In short order, he was living with a wonderful couple who understood his nature because they spent time learning as part of their regular routine. Each bird is a study of one, and that makes our work both harder and more satisfying. For those who labeled Pepe mean and evil, I have this to say. It took me 3 weeks of intense study and deep thought to overcome the bulk of this tendency to label things. I do not expect anyone to instantly overcome this way of thinking. It is dreadfully hard to do. I haven't fully won that battle because I still tend to do it. I review my thoughts over and over. I catch myself in the act most of the time. But sometimes it takes a few days to realize that I won't play with Bruno because Bruno is a dweeb.
Science knowledge only adds to the excitement, the mystery, and the awe of a flower.
Evidence is evidence. It's public. Everybody can look at the evidence and assess it, and eventually, if there's enough evidence, come to the same conclusion.
The Chloe Sanctuary for Parrots and Cockatoos, a nonprofit charity dedicated to the empowerment of captive parrots and public awareness.